I discovered my marriage was rehearsed with a man my wife imprisoned in our attic. The USB drive fell out when I moved the TV stand to vacuum. Small thing, black plastic, no label. I picked it up thinking it was one of mine from work, maybe backup files I'd forgotten about. Sarah was upstairs getting ready for our Friday movie night, her footsteps creaking across the bedroom floor above me. I plugged the drive into our laptop sitting on the coffee table and clicked the first folder. The file name was just a date, March 15th, 2019. 2 years before I met Sarah. The video opened with a man's face. He looked tired, maybe mid-30s, with dark circles under his eyes and a beard that needed trimming. He was sitting in what looked like an attic space, exposed beams visible behind him. He stared directly into the camera with an expression I couldn't quite read, not quite fear, not quite resignation, something broken and exhausted that made my stomach tighten. He held up a newspaper. The date matched the file name. His voice came through the laptop speakers quiet and flat. If you're watching this, you married her. I did too. My footage trained you. My mistakes made you perfect. Sarah's footsteps started down the stairs. I closed the laptop fast, my heart suddenly pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. She came into the living room wearing the sweatpants and oversized shirt she always wore for movie nights, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She smiled at me, that same warm smile I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. She asked what movie I wanted to watch, and I said whatever she wanted was fine. My voice sounded normal, even though my hands were shaking slightly. She settled onto the couch beside me and grabbed the remote, scrolling through streaming options, while I tried to focus on her face instead of the closed laptop on the coffee table. The USB drive was still plugged in, still waiting. I told her I needed to use the bathroom and took the laptop with me, saying I wanted to check a work email real quick. She barely glanced up, already absorbed in reading movie descriptions. I locked the bathroom door and sat on the closed toilet lid with the laptop balanced on my knees, opened the video again, and put in my earbuds. The man in the attic continued talking. She said, "Love requires editing." He lifted his shirt and showed his torso. 3 long scars ran across his ribs, raised and pink against his pale skin. Burns marked his shoulders in patterns that looked deliberate, small circular marks like cigarettes. He lowered his shirt and leaned closer to the camera. "She'll say this is crazy. She'll cry. She'll explain." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "Check the ventilation shaft. Left corner. You'll find what she did with the practice run." The video ended abruptly. I sat there, staring at the frozen final frame showing his face, that same exhausted, broken expression. My hands were sweating against the laptop. Sarah knocked on the bathroom door asking if I was okay. I said I was fine, just dealing with a work thing. She said to hurry up because she'd picked a movie and was starting without me. I flushed the toilet for the sound of it and ran the sink, buying time to think. Opened another file on the drive. This one was dated 6 months earlier than the first. The same man appeared, but he looked healthier, less tired. He was smiling slightly as he spoke into the camera. Day 43. She brought me dinner tonight. Actually sat with me while I ate. We talked about books we'd both read. She seems different lately, more relaxed. Maybe she's finally starting to trust me. He showed the camera around the attic space. A mattress in one corner with rumpled blankets, a small desk with books stacked on it, a bucket in the far corner that I realized was probably his toilet. Then the camera panned down and I saw the chain. Thick metal links attached to a cuff around his ankle, bolted into one of the wooden beams. He touched it almost casually. She says it's for my own protection, that I'm not ready yet, but soon. His smile looked sad and hopeful at the same time. I'm being good. I'm learning what she needs. Sarah knocked again, harder this time. She said the movie was starting and I was missing the beginning. I said I'd be right there, my voice coming out strained. I ejected the USB drive and shoved it in my pocket, then opened the bathroom door. Sarah was standing right there in the hallway, her expression showing concern mixed with slight irritation. She asked if I was feeling sick and I said no, just work stress making my stomach upset. She touched my forehead checking for fever, and I had to force myself not to flinch away from her hand. She said I felt normal and I should just try to relax and watch the movie with her. We walked back to the living room together and I sat on the couch while she curled up against me like always, her head on my shoulder. The movie played, but I couldn't focus on it. I kept feeling the USB drive in my pocket like it was burning through the fabric. Sarah's hand rested on my leg, and I wondered if she could feel me shaking. Halfway through the movie, Sarah got up to make popcorn. I heard her in the kitchen, the microwave humming, cabinets opening and closing. I pulled out my phone and pretended to scroll through social media, while actually trying to remember the layout of our attic. We'd lived in this house for 2 years since getting married. Sarah had handled most of the moving and organization because I'd been busy with a major project at work. She'd said the attic was full of her family's old storage boxes and Christmas decorations, nothing interesting. I'd been up there exactly once, right after we moved in, and she was right. Just boxes and dust and old furniture covered with sheets. I hadn't thought about it since. The microwave beeped, and Sarah came back with a bowl of popcorn, settling in beside me again. She fed me a piece and asked if I was enjoying the movie. I said yes, even though I had no idea what was happening on screen. My mind kept replaying that man's face, his scars, the chain around his ankle, the attic that looked exactly like ours. The movie ended around 11. Sarah stretched and yawned, saying she was exhausted and going to bed. She kissed my cheek and headed upstairs. I told her I'd be up soon, just wanted to clean up the living room first. She waved goodnight without turning around. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close, then pulled out the USB drive again, plugged it into the laptop, and started going through files systematically. There were hundreds of them, videos, photos, documents, all organized by date going back 5 years. I opened a document titled Training Protocol, and my hands started shaking harder. The file contained detailed notes about behavior modification techniques, reward and punishment schedules, psychological conditioning methods. Sarah's handwriting. I recognized it from grocery lists and birthday cards, clinical descriptions of breaking someone down and rebuilding them, notes about what worked and what didn't, references to previous subjects numbered 1 through 3. The man in the video was subject 3. According to the dates, she'd kept him for almost 2 years. I opened a photo file. The man again, but this time he was standing in our bedroom, our actual bedroom with the blue walls and the window overlooking the backyard. He was wearing one of my shirts. Same color, same brand. He was smiling at the camera, posed exactly like one of our wedding photos. Sarah's handwriting on the image file notes. Final stage testing. Response patterns acceptable. Ready for replacement. The date was 2 months before I met Sarah. I clicked through more photos. The man in different poses, different clothes, always in locations I recognized from our house. The coffee shop where Sarah and I had our first date, but with him sitting across from her instead of me. The hiking trail where I'd proposed, but with him kneeling in the same spot I'd knelt. Every significant moment from my relationship with Sarah had apparently been rehearsed first with someone else. Someone she'd kept chained in our attic. My phone buzzed. Text from Sarah asking if I was coming to bed soon. I typed back saying I'd be up in 5 minutes, just finishing some work. She sent back a heart emoji. I stared at it for a long moment before opening the next folder on the drive. This one was labeled Current Subject. Inside were hundreds of video files, all dated within the last 3 years. The time frame of our relationship. I clicked one randomly. The video showed our living room from an angle high in the corner. Me sitting on the couch, reading a book. The timestamp said it was from 6 months ago. I remembered that day. Sarah had been out shopping. I'd been alone, except I hadn't been alone because someone had been watching. Recording. I opened another file. Our bedroom. Me sleeping. 6 different camera angles showing the bed from every direction. Another file. Me in my car sitting in the parking lot at work, crying after getting chewed out by my boss. The camera had to have been mounted somewhere inside the vehicle. Another file. Me in the shower. Me cooking dinner. Me talking to myself while folding laundry. Every private moment captured and archived. I heard footsteps above me. Sarah walking around the bedroom. I closed the laptop and sat there trying to breathe normally, trying to think. The man in the attic said to check the ventilation shaft. Left corner. I had to go up there. I had to know. But the attic entrance was in our bedroom closet. Sarah was awake up there. I couldn't get to it without her knowing. I texted her saying I was going to sleep on the couch tonight because my stomach was still bothering me, and I didn't want to keep her awake if I had to get up. She texted back saying she hoped I felt better and to wake her if I needed anything. Her bedroom light went off a few minutes later. I waited another 30 minutes, checking the time on my phone every few seconds. The house was completely silent except for the usual settling sounds and the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Finally, I stood up and moved toward the stairs as quietly as possible. Each step creaked, no matter how carefully I placed my feet. I froze halfway up, listening for any sound from the bedroom. Nothing. I continued to the top and stood outside our bedroom door for a full minute, ear pressed against the wood. Sarah's breathing was deep and steady, asleep. I turned the doorknob slowly, centimeter by centimeter, until the latch released, pushed the door open just enough to slip through. The bedroom was dark, except for moonlight coming through the window. Sarah was a shape under the covers, facing away from the closet. I moved along the wall toward the closet door, each footstep placed with agonizing care. My shin hit the corner of the dresser, and I bit down on my hand to keep from making noise. Stood there for several seconds until the pain faded. Sarah rolled over, and I pressed myself flat against the wall, not breathing. She settled back into sleep breathing. I reached the closet and opened it as slowly as I'd opened the bedroom door. Inside, I felt along the ceiling until I found the attic access panel. Pushed it up and to the side. The attic ladder folded down with a soft creaking sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. I climbed up into darkness, using my phone's flashlight to see. The attic was exactly as I remembered from 2 years ago. Boxes stacked against the walls, old furniture covered with dusty sheets, Christmas decorations in labeled bins. Nothing unusual. I swept the phone light across the space slowly, looking for anything out of place. The far corner, the ventilation shaft the man had mentioned. I moved toward it, crouching under the low ceiling, stepping carefully between boxes. The shaft was a large metal duct running along the wall, maybe 3 feet across. Left corner, he'd said. I found where the duct connected to the main system and saw that the screws holding the access panel had been recently disturbed. Fresh scratches in the metal. I pulled out my keys and used one to unscrew the panel. It came off easily. Inside the duct was a lockbox. Heavy metal, combination lock on the front. I pulled it out and carried it back toward the attic entrance where there was more light from the bedroom below. Sat down on the dusty floor and examined the lock. 4 digits. I tried our wedding anniversary. Nothing. Sarah's birthday? Nothing. My birthday? Nothing. The date I proposed. The lock clicked open. Inside the box were photographs, Polaroids, old-fashioned kind with white borders and handwritten dates on the bottom. The first photo showed a young man, maybe early 20s, tied to a chair in this same attic. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. The date written below was from 8 years ago. The next photo showed the same man, but worse. More bruises, more damage. The date was 2 weeks later. I flipped through the stack. The progression was documented in careful detail, the young man deteriorating over months. The final photo in his sequence showed just a sheet-covered shape on the attic floor. The date was 6 months after the first photo. The next sequence started with a different man, older, maybe 40. Same pattern, tied up, bruised, progressively worse over time. This sequence lasted almost a year before ending with another sheet-covered shape. Subject 2, according to the training protocol document. The third sequence was the man from the video. I recognized his face even though the photos showed him in various states of injury and exhaustion. His sequence was the longest, almost 2 years of documentation, but his sequence didn't end with a sheet-covered shape. The final photo showed him standing upright, smiling slightly, wearing clothes I recognized as mine. The date was the week before I met Sarah. Written on the bottom in Sarah's handwriting, graduation day, ready for release. I sat there staring at that photo for a long time before I understood what it meant. She'd let him go. Subject 3 had survived. The man who made the video had gotten out. Footsteps on the ladder behind me. I spun around, still holding the photos. Sarah stood at the top of the attic entrance, backlit by the bedroom light below. She was holding something in her right hand, too dark to see what. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. You weren't supposed to find that. I asked her what the fuck all of this was. She climbed up into the attic fully, and I saw that she was holding a taser. Small yellow plastic thing, but I knew what it could do. She said we needed to talk, but I had to stay calm. I scrambled backward, away from her, dropping the photos. She said my name like she was talking to a frightened animal, the same tone she used when calming me after nightmares. She said everything had a logical explanation, and I just needed to listen. I told her to stay away from me. She kept advancing slowly, her expression showing concern and sadness. She said she loved me, that everything she'd done was because she loved me. I asked about the men in the photos. Sarah sighed like I was being difficult. She said they were practice, that she'd spent years learning exactly what she needed in a partner, but real relationships were too unpredictable, too messy. She needed to test her theories in a controlled environment before trying again with someone who mattered. I was shaking my head, backing up until I hit the wall of boxes behind me. She said I was different from the others, that I was the goal she'd been working toward. The first 2 subjects were failures, too weak, too resistant. Subject 3 was closer, but still flawed. Then she'd met me and knew I was perfect. But she couldn't risk making mistakes with me the way she had with the others. So she'd kept subject 3 a little longer to practice the relationship she wanted to have with me. Every conversation we'd had, every date, every intimate moment had been rehearsed first. She'd worked out all the problems with him so everything would be perfect with me. I asked what happened to the first 2 men. Sarah's expression didn't change. She said they'd been released from service when they became too problematic. Her exact words, released from service. I asked what that meant and she said it didn't matter because they weren't relevant anymore. Only we were relevant. Our marriage, our future. She said the surveillance footage was just insurance, documentation of our relationship for reference in case adjustments were needed. She'd been recording me since before we met to learn my patterns and preferences. The cameras in my car, in my apartment, in my office, all installed months before our first conversation at that coffee shop. Our meet cute hadn't been chance. She'd engineered it down to the smallest detail based on personality profiles she'd built from watching me. She knew what to wear, what to say, exactly when to laugh and when to touch my arm. She'd known I would fall in love with her because she'd designed herself to be my perfect match. I asked where subject 3 was now. Sarah smiled slightly. She said he was living in Nevada with a new identity and enough money to stay quiet. She'd kept him for an extra 6 months after I came into the picture to perfect certain interactions. He'd played me during training sessions, wore my clothes, memorized my speech patterns, helped her practice being my wife before she actually became my wife. She showed me a picture on her phone, the man from the video standing in front of a desert landscape, looking healthy and calm. She said he understood that what they'd had was transactional. She'd given him financial security in exchange for his participation. He'd agreed to the arrangement once proper conditioning was complete. No police involvement, no complications, just a clean separation after the training period ended. I said that was insane. She said it was practical, that traditional relationships failed because people didn't prepare properly. She'd simply taken the time to do it right. I asked about the cameras in our house. How many were there? Sarah thought for a moment like she was counting. She said 47. Living room, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, garage, my car, my office. She said she'd been editing together highlights of our relationship into a private documentary, proof that her methods worked, that controlled preparation led to perfect outcomes. She wanted to show me the finished product for our 5th anniversary, show me how beautiful our story was when properly curated. I told her she was sick. She needed help. Professional psychiatric help. Sarah's expression finally shifted. Not to anger, to disappointment. She said she'd worried I might react this way when the truth came out. That I might not understand the gift she'd given me. The perfect marriage, perfect love, perfect life. All because she'd worked so hard to eliminate every possible point of failure. She'd studied me for months before we met. She'd practiced being exactly what I needed. She'd removed all variables and uncertainty from our relationship. I told her she'd kidnapped and tortured people, that she was a criminal, that I was going to the police. Sarah shook her head. She said, I wouldn't do that because it would destroy everything we'd built. Our home, our reputation, our future. She said the man in Nevada had already tried going to the police 3 months after she released him. They'd investigated and found nothing actionable. No physical evidence linking him to our house. No proof of anything criminal. Just the rambling accusations of someone with a documented history of mental illness. Sarah had been very careful about that. She'd made sure all 3 subjects had psychiatric records showing instability before she'd approached them. Men who'd been hospitalized before. Men whose accusations wouldn't be believed. She'd selected me specifically because I had no such history. No mental health issues, no criminal record, no substance abuse. I was stable and successful. The perfect candidate for her perfected methodology. I moved toward the attic entrance. Sarah stepped in front of it, taser raised. She said we weren't done talking, that I needed to understand why she'd done this. I said I understood perfectly. She was a psychopath who'd abducted and tortured people to practice being a human being. She flinched at that word. Psychopath. She said that wasn't fair, that she'd given those men purpose and care and financial compensation, that she'd fed them and provided entertainment and treated them with respect. The first 2 had simply been unable to handle the pressure of the training program. Subject 3 had graduated successfully. She'd learned from her mistakes with each iteration. By the time she'd started with me, she'd perfected every aspect of partnership. Didn't I see how lucky I was? How much easier our relationship had been than most people's? No fights, no misunderstandings, no growing pains. Everything smooth and beautiful from day one. That was her gift to me. I asked what she'd do if I left, if I walked out right now and never came back. Sarah's face showed genuine confusion. She said that wasn't possible, that I loved her, that our marriage was real and sacred. I was just scared because the truth was overwhelming. But we'd work through this together. We'd talk it out like we'd talked through everything else. She'd help me understand. And if I couldn't understand right away, she'd wait, be patient, give me time to process, but we'd be together. She'd made certain of that months ago when she'd slowly isolated me from my closest friends, when she'd engineered conflicts with my family that had led to me barely speaking to them anymore, when she'd made herself the center of my entire world. She said she'd done it so carefully I hadn't even noticed. Every suggestion about friends who weren't good enough for me, every concern about family members who didn't respect our marriage, all gentle and loving and wrapped in care. Now, I had no one else, only her. I realized she was right. My best friend from college, Kevin, had stopped calling after Sarah mentioned several times that he seemed dismissive of our relationship. My sister hadn't spoken to me in months after Sarah convinced me she was jealous of our happiness. My parents visited once a year now instead of monthly, because Sarah always found reasons why their timing was inconvenient. She'd pruned away everyone else systematically, until there was just us. Just our perfect marriage, in our perfect house, with our perfect routines. I'd thought I was happy. I'd thought I'd finally found someone who understood me completely. But understanding required learning, and Sarah had skipped that part. She'd just watched me, like a specimen in a jar, until she knew which buttons to press. She'd stolen my privacy, and my autonomy, and my choices. She'd built a puppet version of love and expected me to dance along. Sarah said she could see I needed space to think, that she'd give me tonight to process everything, but in the morning we'd talk more, make a plan forward. She said the important thing was that I understood she'd never stopped loving me, that everything had been for us. I asked if she'd planned to tell me eventually. She said yes, once we had children and our life was fully established, once I was too invested to leave. She'd been planning to show me the documentary and explain how much preparation had gone into our happiness. She'd thought I'd be grateful, impressed by her dedication and thoroughness. She'd misjudged that aspect. She could see now that the reveal needed different framing, more time, better context. She was already working through how to fix this communication error, her mind visibly processing, categorizing, planning the next approach. I was watching her malfunction in real time. I told her I was leaving, going to a hotel tonight and figuring out my next steps tomorrow. Sarah's expression hardened. She said that wasn't acceptable, that I was having an emotional reaction and making poor decisions. She needed me to stay calm and rational. I moved toward the attic entrance again, and she triggered the taser. The electrodes shot out and hit my chest. 50,000 volts locked my muscles. I went down hard on the attic floor, convulsing. The pain was impossible. Everywhere at once, white and electric and all-consuming. It lasted 5 seconds that felt like minutes. When it stopped, I couldn't move. My body was limp and unresponsive. Sarah stood over me, looking regretful. She said she was sorry, but I'd forced her hand. That she'd use restraints tonight and we'd talk in the morning when I was calmer. She pulled zip ties from her pocket. She'd been prepared for this possibility. She'd planned for my resistance the same way she'd planned everything else. She secured my wrists behind my back, then my ankles. Professional technique, tight enough to hold, but not tight enough to cut circulation. She'd practiced this before on other subjects. I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't work properly. She said the effects would wear off in a few minutes, that I'd be uncomfortable, but safe. She dragged me toward the far corner of the attic, the one I hadn't explored yet. Behind a stack of boxes was a space I hadn't seen before, a small cleared area with a camping cot and blankets. A bucket in the corner, books stacked neatly against the wall, a chain and cuff attached to a beam, exactly like the ones in the video. Subject 4's space, already prepared, already waiting. She'd been planning this contingency for how long? Since before we married? Since she first installed the cameras in my apartment? Sarah attached the ankle cuff, locked it with a key she wore on a necklace I'd never noticed before. She said this was temporary, just until I understood that leaving wasn't an option, that our marriage was permanent and sacred. She'd keep me here a few days, maybe a week. We'd talk, she'd help me see reason. Then everything would go back to normal. Better than normal because we'd have no more secrets between us. Complete honesty and transparency. She'd been looking forward to this phase, actually. Living openly without having to hide the cameras or the preparation work. She could finally share her research with me. Show me all the data she'd collected about optimal relationship dynamics. I'd find it fascinating once I overcame the initial emotional response. She touched my face gently, said she loved me, that she'd bring me dinner in a few hours, once I'd had time to calm down. She climbed down the attic ladder and pulled it up behind her. The access panel slid closed. I heard the bedroom closet door shut. Her footsteps crossed to the bed. Springs creaked as she lay down, then silence. I lay on the cot with my wrists and ankles zip-tied, the chain locked around my ankle, staring at the underside of the roof. My body still felt wrong from the taser, muscles twitching randomly, heart racing. I could hear my own breathing loud in the dark space. The attic was cold. Sarah hadn't left me any blankets. Punishment or oversight? Probably calculated. Keep the subject uncomfortable enough to be compliant, but not so uncomfortable they become resistant. I'd read that in her training protocol document. Optimal discomfort ranges for behavioral modification. My wife had researched the exact temperature and restraint configuration that would break someone most efficiently. Hours passed, maybe 3 or 4. Hard to tell in complete darkness. My wrists were going numb from the zip ties. I'd been working them back and forth slowly, trying to stretch the plastic, but they held firm. Commercial grade, the kind police used. Sarah had probably ordered them online along with the taser and the ankle cuff and all the other equipment for her perfect marriage. I thought about the man in the video. Subject 3. He'd survived 2 years of this. 2 years of being Sarah's practice dummy while she learned exactly how to manipulate someone into loving her. And then, she'd let him go with money and a new identity, because he'd finally become compliant enough to trust. She'd broken him so completely, he'd agreed to stay silent about his captivity. Or maybe she'd just convinced him that no one would believe him anyway, that his psychiatric history and lack of evidence made him powerless, that his only option was to take the money and disappear. I heard the access panel open. Flashlight beam swept across the attic. Sarah descended the ladder carrying a tray. She'd brought breakfast, eggs and toast and coffee. The coffee smelled good and I hated that I wanted it. She set the tray down and removed the zip ties from my wrists, keeping the taser in her other hand. She said if I tried anything, she'd use it again. That last night's dose was on the gentle setting, but she could increase it if necessary. I rubbed my wrists trying to get feeling back. She handed me the coffee and I drank it because I needed something warm. She sat cross-legged on the floor watching me eat. Her expression was patient and calm. She said we should start by addressing my misconceptions about the situation, that I was framing everything too negatively when really this was all quite positive. She'd invested years of work into building our perfect life together. That kind of dedication deserved appreciation, not anger. I asked what happened to subjects 1 and 2, the ones whose sequences ended with sheet-covered shapes in the photos. Sarah sighed. She said they'd been failures, unable or unwilling to adapt to the training protocols. Subject 1 had been too aggressive, constant resistance and threats. After 6 months, it became clear he wouldn't progress. Subject 2 had been too passive, complete shutdown, wouldn't engage no matter what methods she tried. Both had proven incompatible with her research goals. I asked again, what happened to them? Sarah said they'd been released from service. Same phrase as before, clinical and cold. I said that meant she'd killed them. Sarah's expression didn't change. She said that was an unnecessarily dramatic way to describe data points that had outlived their research utility. That she'd given them opportunities to succeed, and they'd failed. Their outcomes were their own responsibility. She said Subject 3 had been her breakthrough. He'd had the right balance of resistance and compliance. Enough fight to make the training challenging, but enough self-preservation to eventually accept conditioning. She'd kept him longer than originally planned because he'd become such an effective training tool. Once he'd learned to anticipate her needs and mirror them back, she'd had him role-play every possible scenario she might encounter with me. Practice arguments, practice intimacy, practice daily routines. He'd been a perfect simulation of me before I even knew she existed. She said watching the footage of those training sessions now made her nostalgic, seeing how carefully she'd prepared for our life together, how much love and effort had gone into every detail. She wanted to show me that footage so I could understand, appreciate what she'd built for us. I asked why she'd let Subject 3 live when the first two died. Sarah thought about that for a moment. She said partly because he'd earned his graduation by succeeding where the others failed, partly because killing him had seemed wasteful when he could be rehabilitated and released, and partly because she'd wanted to test whether her conditioning would hold after physical containment ended, whether Subject 3 would stay silent and compliant once he was free. He'd been out for 3 years now and never reported her, never broke their agreement. That success had proven her methodology worked even in post-training environments. It meant that when I eventually graduated from this temporary adjustment period, I'd stay loyal too. We'd continue our marriage without me ever telling anyone about what I'd learned, because the conditioning was that effective, that permanent. I told her I'd never agree to that the moment she let me go, I'd go straight to the police. Sarah smiled. She said that's what Subject 3 had said too in the beginning, but 18 months of careful work had changed his perspective. He'd come to understand that his best option was cooperation, that fighting her was exhausting and pointless, that accepting the situation led to reward and comfort, while resistance led to discomfort and pain. The human brain was remarkably adaptable when properly motivated. She'd studied behavioral psychology for years, specifically to understand how to optimize the training process. The first two subjects had been when she was still learning. Subject 3 had benefited from her improved methodology. I would benefit from everything she'd learned across all 3 previous attempts. My conditioning would be faster and more effective than any of them. She predicted I'd reach acceptance within 6 months, maybe less, since I'd already spent 3 years in the preliminary phase of training without realizing it. She said our marriage up until now had been the foundation. She'd taught me to rely on her emotionally, to see her as my primary source of happiness and validation. She'd isolated me from competing attachments. She'd structured my environment and routines to reinforce dependency. All the groundwork was complete. This next phase was just making the implicit explicit, helping me consciously accept what I'd already unconsciously embraced. I was already conditioned. I just hadn't realized it yet. The proof was in how perfectly our relationship had functioned, how naturally I'd fallen into the patterns she'd designed, how content I'd been in the life she'd constructed. She said I'd been happier with her than I'd ever been before because she'd engineered my happiness with precision, and I could have that happiness again once I stopped fighting the reality of our situation. I asked what exactly she wanted from me, what the end goal was. Sarah brightened at the question, like I was finally engaging properly. She said she wanted partnership, real, permanent, unconditional partnership. Someone who understood her completely and accepted her fully. She said most people pretended to accept their partners but secretly wanted them to change, to be different in small or large ways. She'd eliminated that problem by building me into her ideal partner from the ground up, and now I needed to do the same. Accept her as she was, including the methods she'd used to bring us together. Stop judging her actions through the lens of conventional morality. Recognize that she'd done everything out of love, that her unconventional approach had led to unconventional success. We were happier than any normal couple. Our marriage was stronger than any traditional relationship, all because she'd been willing to do the hard work that others avoided. She said in 6 months or a year or however long it took, I'd thank her for not giving up on us, for caring enough to fight for our marriage even when I was confused and resistant. She'd continue documenting everything for the final version of our relationship documentary. This phase would make the story richer, more complete. The chapter where we overcame adversity and emerged stronger. She was already planning how to edit the footage, the emotional arc of discovery, resistance, and eventual acceptance. It would be beautiful. Proof that love could survive complete transparency. That real intimacy meant seeing all of someone, even the dark parts, and choosing them anyway. She said I'd see all of her now, her methods and her history and her true self. And eventually I'd choose her because she'd proven herself worthy through years of dedication and sacrifice. I told her she was delusional, that this wasn't love, that I'd never accept what she'd done. Sarah's patience finally cracked slightly. She said I was being childish, clinging to naive romantic ideals that had no basis in reality. Real love required work and compromise and sometimes sacrifice. She'd sacrificed her own comfort and safety by keeping me here where I might resist or try to escape. She'd sacrificed years of her life studying and practicing and preparing for our relationship. She'd sacrificed 3 previous subjects working toward perfection, all for me, and I couldn't even appreciate that sacrifice enough to consider her perspective. She stood up and collected the breakfast tray, said she'd give me more time alone to think. That isolation often helped people gain clarity. Subject 3 had benefited from several extended isolation periods during his training. She climbed back down the ladder and sealed the attic again. The day passed in complete darkness. No sounds except the house settling and occasional creaks of Sarah moving around below. I worked on the zip ties more, pulling and twisting until my wrists bled. The plastic finally snapped around mid-afternoon, based on the quality of light coming through a small vent in the roof. My wrists were free, but my ankle was still chained. I examined the cuff. Stainless steel with a serious lock, not something I could pick or break. The chain was bolted to a beam with lag bolts driven deep into the wood. I'd need tools to remove it. Tools Sarah obviously wasn't going to provide. I searched the space within reach of my chain, found the books she'd left. Psychology texts mostly, behavioral conditioning, relationship dynamics, manipulation techniques. A notebook, tucked between them, had handwritten notes. Sarah's research on me specifically, pages of observations about my habits and preferences and fears. She'd been studying me for years, long before we met. One entry caught my eye, dated 4 years ago, 8 months before our first date. Subject exhibits strong loyalty patterns and conflict avoidance behaviors. Childhood trauma from parental divorce creates attachment anxiety. Ideal candidate for dependency-based conditioning. Primary vulnerability is need for emotional stability. Secondary vulnerability is social isolation. Tertiary vulnerability is low self-esteem masked by professional success. Recommended approach: position myself as stable, understanding, supportive. Build trust through consistency and validation. Slowly eliminate competing attachments. Create situation where subject's emotional needs can only be met by me. Estimated conditioning timeline: 18 to 24 months for preliminary phase. 6 to 12 months for transition to explicit phase. She'd mapped out our entire relationship before it started. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every major milestone had been following her predetermined plan. Sarah came back that evening with dinner and more to drink. She asked if I'd had productive thinking time. I said I'd been reading her notes, understanding exactly how calculated everything had been. Sarah looked pleased. She said transparency was good, that I was starting to see the whole picture instead of just reacting emotionally. She said Subject 3 had a similar breakthrough around day 5 when she'd let him read parts of her research. Seeing the methodology in black and white helped people understand they weren't dealing with random cruelty, but systematic preparation. It reframed the experience, made it less personal and more professional. I asked if she'd done this to anyone before the 3 subjects. She said no. They'd been her first attempts at applied research. Before them, she'd only studied theory, reading psychology papers and relationship self-help books in true crime cases, building her knowledge base before beginning practical experimentation. She said she'd chosen the first subject carefully, someone with no close family and a history of mental health issues that would discredit him if he reported her. She'd met him at a support group for people with depression, positioned herself as understanding and caring, invited him to stay with her temporarily when he mentioned housing instability. Once he was living in her house, she'd gradually introduced restrictions, told him it was for his own good, his safety. Eventually, the restrictions became explicit captivity. She'd kept him for 6 months before his resistance became unmanageable. She described his death clinically, an overdose of sleeping pills mixed into his food. She'd cremated his body using a furnace at an abandoned industrial site she'd researched, scattered the ashes in a lake 3 states away. No body meant no crime, no missing person report because he'd already been isolated and homeless. Subject 2 had been similar, someone already on society's margins. She'd met him at a homeless shelter where she'd volunteered specifically to find suitable candidates. She'd been more confident by then, more certain of her methods, but she'd misjudged his psychological resilience. He'd shut down completely within 2 months, stopped talking, stopped eating properly, barely moved. She'd tried various interventions, but nothing worked. After 10 months, she'd made the same decision as with Subject 1, overdose, cremation, disposal. She said she'd learned important lessons from both failures, the importance of selecting subjects with the right psychological profile, neither too resistant nor too passive, strong enough to survive the conditioning but flexible enough to adapt. Subject 3 had been perfect in that regard, and I'd been even better because she'd practiced on Subject 3 first. I asked how she could talk about murdering people so casually. Sarah looked confused by the question. She said murder implied malice or cruelty. Her actions had been practical responses to research failures. The subjects hadn't been harmed unnecessarily. They'd been fed and housed and treated with respect until their continued existence became problematic. She'd ended their lives as humanely as possible, quick and painless, no suffering beyond what was required for the research. She said it was unfortunate they'd been incompatible with her goals, but their deaths had served a purpose. They'd taught her what didn't work. Their sacrifice had made her methodology stronger, had made our relationship possible. In a way, I should be grateful to them. Their failures had paved the way for our success. I told her she was a monster, that nothing justified what she'd done. Sarah's expression hardened again. She said I was being judgmental and close-minded. That history was full of people who'd advanced human knowledge through unconventional methods. that sometimes progress required difficult choices. She'd made those choices in service of understanding love and partnership at a fundamental level. Her research had value even if I couldn't see it yet. She said, Subject 3 understood. He'd written her a letter 6 months after his release thanking her for the experience, saying it had taught him things about himself he'd never known, that the conditioning had actually improved his life by giving him clarity and purpose. She showed me a photo of the letter on her phone, handwritten on plain paper. The words were what she'd described, grateful and complimentary, but I could see the subtext, the fear, underneath. He'd written what she wanted to hear because he was terrified she'd come back for him if he didn't. Sarah put her phone away and said she needed to go handle some work. She'd check on me again before bed. She secured my wrists with fresh zip ties despite my resistance. The taser was always in her hand, ready. She climbed down the ladder and sealed the attic. I lay there in darkness thinking about everything she'd told me. 2 men dead, 1 man freed but traumatized and living in fear. And me, the 4th subject, the one she'd practiced for, the one she believed would be her ultimate success. I thought about the cameras she'd installed throughout my life, the hours of footage she'd collected, the careful notes about my vulnerabilities, every private moment stolen and analyzed, every relationship sabotaged to isolate me. Years of manipulation leading to this moment, her greatest experiment, her perfect marriage. I slept badly. Nightmares about being buried alive, about drowning in darkness, about being watched by invisible eyes. Woke up multiple times to complete disorientation before remembering where I was. Morning came and Sarah brought breakfast again. She seemed cheerful, said she'd been editing footage from the last few days, that my reactions were more authentic than she'd expected, less performative. She appreciated that honesty, said it would make the documentary stronger. I didn't eat the food she brought, didn't drink the coffee. She frowned and said refusing nutrition was counterproductive, that I'd need energy for the work ahead. I asked what work she meant. She said the work of acceptance, of rebuilding our marriage on a foundation of complete truth. She'd prepared a curriculum, reading assignments, discussion topics, exercises designed to help me process and integrate. Same methodology she'd used with Subject 3, proven effective. She left the food and went back downstairs. I heard her on the phone talking to her boss, telling them she was taking family leave, a personal emergency that needed her attention. She'd be working remotely for the next month. Her voice was perfectly normal, professional and polite, no indication that she was currently holding her husband prisoner in their attic. She ended the call, and I heard her start vacuuming the living room. Normal Saturday morning routine, maintaining the appearance of ordinary life while running her experiment above. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. She'd compartmentalized so completely that there was no internal conflict. In her mind, she was simultaneously a good wife doing housework and a researcher conducting important psychological studies. Both identities were real to her. Both were justified and right. The USB drive was still in my pocket. Sarah hadn't searched me, hadn't thought about it. Small oversight in her otherwise meticulous planning. I worked it out with my bound hands and managed to hide it in the cot's mattress. Small tear in the fabric where I could slip it inside. If I got out of here, I'd need evidence. The drive had Subject 3's videos, proof of at least one other victim. Combined with the photos in the lockbox and Sarah's own documentation, there might be enough to make someone believe me. Might. Subject 3 had tried reporting her and gotten nowhere. But he'd been alone. No physical evidence, no credibility. I had more. The cameras she'd installed in my house proved her surveillance. Her training protocol document proved premeditation. The photos proved a pattern. Together, it might be enough. Days blurred together. Sarah maintained a schedule. Breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, books and discussion topics in between. She'd sit with me for hours talking about behavioral psychology and relationship dynamics and the nature of love, trying to convince me that her methods were sound, that everything she'd done made sense within her framework. I pretended to engage, asked questions, took notes on the legal pad she provided, let her believe the conditioning was working, that I was starting to see her perspective. It was survival strategy. Subject 3's videos had taught me that. Show compliance, reduce resistance, wait for opportunity. Sarah responded positively, said I was making progress much faster than Subject 3, that I was exceeding her projected timeline. She started leaving my wrists unbound during her visits, still had the taser, still kept the ankle chain locked, but less physical restraint meant increasing trust. 2 weeks into captivity, she let me shower, supervised with the bathroom door open and her sitting outside. She'd installed a chain extension that reached to the bathroom. I stood under hot water for 20 minutes while she watched. No privacy, no dignity, but the shower felt incredible anyway, being clean, feeling almost human. Afterward, she gave me fresh clothes, my clothes from the bedroom. She said she'd been washing them regularly, maintaining our normal routine as much as possible. She showed me her calendar where she'd blocked out time for my conditioning sessions, color-coded and organized like any other project. Subject 4 training showed up on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7 to 9 p.m., the same time slots where she'd written home project during Subject 3's training. Everything documented, everything tracked. She said we were approaching the next phase. where I'd start having supervised time in the main house, learning to function normally while understanding the surveillance was permanent. She'd keep the cameras running always, monitor my activities and conversations, make sure I didn't try reaching out for help or deviating from our agreement. But I'd have freedom of movement within our home. No more chain, no more attic. Just life as before with explicit acknowledgement that she was watching. Subject 3 had graduated to that phase after 6 months. She thought I'd be ready in 2 more weeks. I told her I appreciated her confidence in me, that I was starting to understand her perspective, that I wanted to make our marriage work. The lies came easily. Survival made me a good actor. Sarah smiled and touched my face gently, said she'd known I was special, that I'd succeed where others failed. 3 weeks in, she removed the ankle cuff, said I'd earned mobility privileges through consistent cooperation. She kept the taser in her pocket but gave me access to the main house during daytime. I was allowed to watch TV, read books, use the kitchen, but not to go outside, not to access phones or computers, not to open curtains or make noise that neighbors might hear. She worked from home at the dining table, her laptop open showing spreadsheets and client emails, one eye always on me. I moved through our house like a ghost haunting my own life, sat on our couch where we'd watched movies, cooked in our kitchen where she'd taught me her grandmother's recipes, everything familiar and wrong simultaneously. The cameras were everywhere, like she'd said. Small black lenses in corners and vents, 47 different angles capturing my every movement. I waved at one in the living room. Sarah looked up from her laptop and smiled. The documentary she'd been editing was on an external hard drive she kept in her office desk. I'd seen her working on it multiple times, importing footage, arranging clips, adding transitions. She said it was nearly complete. Just needed the final chapter, showing my acceptance and our happy ending. She wanted to screen it for me soon, show me everything she'd done, the years of preparation and surveillance and practice, the proof that her methodology worked. I told her I'd like to see it, that I was curious about her process. She looked pleased, said she'd prepare a proper screening once I demonstrated full compliance, maybe next week if progress continued. She was talking about renewal, about rebuilding our marriage on this new foundation, about the future we'd have together, children eventually, expanding her research into family dynamics, teaching our kids about healthy relationships built on complete honesty and controlled environments. 4 weeks in, I'd mapped the house security. Sarah had installed cameras, but not physical barriers. The doors weren't specially locked, the windows weren't barred. She was relying on psychological conditioning and her taser to keep me contained, but she had to sleep eventually, had to let her guard down. I was stronger than her physically. If I could get the taser away from her, I could overpower her, get out, get help. But timing was critical. If I failed, I'd be back in the attic, back in chains. She'd increase security, maybe never trust me again. It had to work on the first attempt. I waited for the right moment, showed perfect compliance, perfect acceptance, let her believe I was broken, let her think she'd won. The opportunity came 5 weeks into captivity. Sarah had been drinking wine with dinner, celebrating my progress. She was more relaxed than usual, talking about vacation plans, places she wanted to take me once I was fully integrated. She poured a third glass and I saw her hands were slightly unsteady, not drunk, but definitely impaired. She was sitting on the couch beside me watching a nature documentary. The taser was in her pocket like always, but her attention was on the TV. I asked if she wanted more wine. She said yes. I went to the kitchen and refilled her glass, came back and handed it to her. She smiled and squeezed my hand, told me she was proud of how far I'd come, that she loved me. I said I loved her too. The lie felt bitter, but necessary. She drank the 4th glass slowly over the next hour. Her eyelids were getting heavy. She leaned against me on the couch, her weight warm and familiar. The woman I'd loved, the monster who'd imprisoned me, both true simultaneously. She said she was tired, that we should go to bed. I helped her up and we walked upstairs together. She used the bathroom and changed into pajamas while I waited in the bedroom. When she came out, she was swaying slightly. She got into bed and patted the space beside her. I lay down next to her like I had hundreds of times before. She curled against me, closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing deepened. Sleep. I waited another 20 minutes to be sure, then carefully extracted myself from her grip. She murmured but didn't wake. I took the taser from her nightstand where she'd placed it, held it in my hand, feeling the weight. Part of me wanted to use it on her, let her feel what I'd felt, but that would wake her. I needed silence. I went downstairs to her office, unlocked now that she trusted me. The external hard drive with the documentary was in the desk drawer. I took it, went to the living room and found her purse, her car keys and phone inside. I grabbed both, moved to the front door, my hand on the knob. Freedom right there. But I stopped, looked back at the house, at the cameras still recording, at the attic where I'd been chained, at the evidence of everything Sarah had done. If I just left, she'd wake up tomorrow and run, disappear before police arrived, take her research and her documentation and vanish, start over somewhere else with a new identity, find a new subject, do this to someone else. I couldn't let that happen. I went back to her office and found the lockbox with the photos, grabbed her laptop with all her files, the training protocol document. The notes about me and the previous subjects. Everything. I piled it all in my car, made 3 trips loading evidence, then went back inside one last time. Sarah was still sleeping upstairs. I stood in the bedroom doorway watching her. She looked peaceful, innocent, the mask she'd worn for me for 3 years. I wondered if she'd ever actually loved me or if every moment had been performance. Probably didn't matter. Love that required this much control wasn't love. It was ownership, possession, a careful study that ended in imprisonment. I took photos of the bedroom with my recovered phone, documentation of the cameras she'd installed, then went to the attic and photographed everything there. The chain, the cot, the space where she'd kept me, where she'd kept subject 3 before me, where subjects 1 and 2 had died. I called 911 from the driveway, told the dispatcher my wife had been holding me prisoner, that she'd killed 2 people and imprisoned 2 others, that I had evidence in my car. The dispatcher sounded skeptical but said officers were on the way. I waited in my car with the doors locked and the engine running, ready to leave if Sarah woke up and came after me. The police arrived 12 minutes later. 2 cars, 4 officers. I showed them everything. The hard drive, the laptop, the photos, the documents. Showed them the fresh marks on my wrists from zip ties, the taser burns on my chest. Took them into the house and showed them the cameras, the attic space, Sarah's office with more documentation. They arrested her at 5:30 in the morning when they went upstairs. She woke up confused, then saw the officers and understood. She looked at me standing in the bedroom doorway. Her expression wasn't anger or fear, just disappointment. Like I'd failed a test she'd expected me to pass. The investigation took 6 months. Police found remains at the abandoned industrial site Sarah had mentioned. 2 bodies, burned but identifiable through dental records, subjects 1 and 2. They tracked down subject 3 in Nevada. He testified at trial, confirmed everything, described his captivity and conditioning, and the agreement she'd forced on him. The surveillance footage from my house was admitted as evidence. Hours of documentation showing Sarah's crimes in her own recordings. The training protocol, the psychological profiles, the systematic isolation and manipulation. Her defense attorney argued mental illness, that Sarah had genuine delusions about love and relationships, that she needed psychiatric treatment, not prison. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. 2 murders, 3 kidnappings, multiple counts of assault and unlawful imprisonment. The judge sentenced her to life without parole. I testified at the sentencing hearing, described what she'd done to me, to subject 3, to the men who'd died. The judge asked if I had anything to say directly to Sarah. I looked at her sitting at the defense table in Prison Orange. She was staring at me with that same disappointed expression. I said I hoped she'd use her time in prison to understand why what she'd done was wrong, that her research had been built on suffering and death, that real love didn't require surveillance or chains or conditioning, just mutual respect and choice, things she'd stolen from all of us. She didn't respond, just kept staring with those cold, analytical eyes, still studying me even now, still taking notes in her mind. I walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. Subject 3 and I stay in occasional contact. We're both in therapy, processing trauma that'll probably never fully heal. He got his settlement money from the civil suit against Sarah's estate. I got mine. We meet for coffee sometimes in a neutral city between where we both live now. Talk about recovery and boundaries and trust issues. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.